How does autism differentiate between men and women? And how do we come together as a community to achieve greater unity and collaboration? Well, that is what we're going to discuss. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Aspergian Journal. The debate on how autism affects men versus women in terms of their behaviours and characteristics can be a decisive and complicated discussion to explore and fully understand. This can be significant, especially for those who don't have a full understanding about autism on a practical level and also from a living perspective. However, with supportive guidance and collaboration, the autism community can be influential in advocating for each other in various compassionate ways and celebrate our individualism respectively, despite the adversities that we can relate to. Before I do continue on this video, I want to make you aware that as an autistic man, I can only speak for my own experiences, and I cannot speak for autistic women or be able to articulate their experiences fully. However, I will try my best to put my fullest knowledge forward respectfully and in a supportive manner. The first question is, how does autism affect men and women differently? Well, as we all know, since the early years of autism research, which includes the works of Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger in the 1940s, there has been a historical bias that assumed that autism is found and affects boys far more than girls. It has been often noted that their research and diagnosis criteria was created and shaped by the autistic traits and that were commonly found in boys and men, and worked on that assumption that the ratio of the number of boys that have autism over girls is usually 3-1. This gap reflects the number of autistic girls and women that haven't been diagnosed or undiagnosed, which has then impacted their lives in many ways, and they commonly question themselves about why are they different from their neurotypical peers. From my own experiences as an autistic person, I have found that there is just as many girls as there are being diagnosed with autism as there are boys. There was a recent study done by the British Medical Journal which confirmed that belief, that girls are just as likely to be autistic as much as boys are, and it did state that girls and women often get diagnosed later on in life. There are many characteristics and that autistic men and women do face, but how they navigate those challenges or process the thoughts and emotions that come with them and that do slightly differ. Now, as a rule, there's always going to be exceptions, and that where how men process something might be different to women, and then vice versa. There's always going to be an exception to that rule, but in general, you know, a lot of these, the differentiation of how men autistic men deal with certain things compared to autistic women is usually down to the biological differences between the two genders. It is often regarded, regardless if they're autistic or not, that men sometimes struggle with processing and expressing their emotions, where women are often they can express their emotions more effectively. Now, that's not a dig at either of the two genders. It's just that is the biological difference, and of how each other deal with certain things. There's certain challenges and other autistic women have to face, like dealing with periods or their menstrual cycles, pregnancy, and various other things that they go through life, like menopause and various other things, which men can't relate to, because men are just biologically different to women. That's not a dig at them. That's just a biological fact, and that we have known for centuries. Like, there might be certain things in that men have to face, like, being the provider and the protector of the family unit, and have to deal with the stresses and the emotions that come with that. And how they have to deal with that might be different to how women have to manage those things, like childcare and various other things, and that involves in that family life cycle. The first major characteristic is masking and camouflaging. Now, this is a common trait, and that for a majority of people on the autistic spectrum, and they do go about trying to mask their autistic traits to usually try and fit in and into society. However, where the differentiation between men and women on the autistic spectrum is that men, they don't usually get so hang up about masking their autistic traits to suit other people. And in one respect, and that they usually are a bit more laid back of how they deal with things, and just focus on what brings joy to their life, and that, look, despite whatever anxieties that they face, and that when confronting certain challenges. Where women, on the other hand, they have this desire of wanting to be liked, to be respected, and feel like they're part of the group, and that so they'll actually be more effective of masking their traits, their autistic traits, more greater than men will. And this is one of the key dominating facts of why girls and women and that have been diagnosed later on in life, because those autistic traits don't really show in a visual sense to other people to the greater degree of what it occurs in boys and men. And that's where that notion then supports the assumptions and that were made by many researchers, and that decades ago, when autism was like a new thing. Boys and men and that were able to show their autistic traits more visually to a greater degree, and that from what girls and women did. As we've highlighted before, masking and that can occur in various habits and behaviours, like observing and imitating social behaviours from others, rehearsing conversations in our heads before we're speaking, suppressing our stimming acts so we're not seen to be struggling out of that irrational fear of being judged or rejected by others, and forcing that eye-to-eye contact when engaging with others, even though it can be uncomfortable for that autistic person to do. Even though masking can help autistic men and women navigate social environments and protect them from that risk of rejection and judgment, but all that really does, it just leads towards us having more mental exhaustion, confused about their autism identity and acceptance, and ultimately suffering with severe autistic burnout because they're trying to hide their true selves in front of others to try and fit into society's expectations of what everyone should be, even though it doesn't suit that autistic people, because we're just slightly different and that to our neurotypical peers. When reflecting on my experiences with masking or camouflaging my autistic traits, I spent many years trying to hide them, in the efforts of being seen as equal or the same as my neurotypical peers, alongside, this constant denial that I was autistic and I wanted to be like a neurotypical person. But it wasn't really the case that I didn't know that I was different, but I just wanted to try and fit into society and be accepted. But in that vain effort of wanting to achieve that, all I was doing was I was just being accepted by the wrong standards and those and that wouldn't give me the time of day. So really my efforts and that would have been futile. The one thing that I learnt from this is that it doesn't matter what you do in life, you're always going to have someone that's going to judge you or look at you in a certain way and you think, well, look, he's different and so on. At the end of the day, you just got to focus on who you are and become the best version of yourself. And that's all that really matters at the end of the day. Characteristic number 2, socialisation and communication. Even though autistic men and women struggle with socialising and they exhibit behaviours in ways of coping, there is slight differences of how men and women deal with those social situations and obviously when communicating with others. Autistic men usually prefer talking about their special interests at great depth, may interrupt conversations unintentionally, and they can often appear to be blunt, honest, or direct in their responses, while struggling to understand those facial expressions from others, and often have preferences of spending time on their own, and they do not appear to be aware of the social expectations, like knowing those unspoken social clues that a lot of autistic people do struggle with. Autistic women, on the other hand, they do have a strong desire and to have friendships, despite the struggles and that they might face and that in maintaining those friendships. They often try and observe social groups carefully and try and copy other people's behaviours, and at practicing conversations beforehand in the efforts of trying to fit in so they don't make any mistakes, or they have that fear that they're going to make a mistake, which is irrational in its nature, and often appear socially acceptable even though they feel mentally exhausted and from those experiences. A good example of this is where an autistic woman might want to join a friendship group and laugh along at the right moments, yet they'll spend hours and afterwards, replaying every interaction they had in their head and trying to be self-critical at the same time. Where men, on the other hand, they're more happy spending their spare time and talking about their favourite subjects inside and out, instead of joining like large group activities. Socialisation has really been the thorn on my side throughout my life as an autistic person, as socialising does not come natural to me, especially when I'm surrounded by people that I can't really relate to, or I don't show any interest in what I've got to say, or never ask anything about me or whatever I'm doing. And sometimes these feelings can hurt really massively, especially when it's family members that ignore you or ignore me at the best of times. Communication is something that I can do well in, and I always have my manners and when I'm greeting or addressing people, which is a behaviour and that I learned and that from a very young age, especially when I was in an autism specialist school. But when it comes to building friendships and maintaining them, sometimes it's a lot harder to initiate and to uphold, and that than what it would be for a neurotypical person. Characteristic number 3: autistic friendships. Even though autistic men and women do strongly desire to have close friends and have people that they can rely on, the universe and that finds in many ways to put challenges and obstacles in place from that feeling to become a true reality. This reality can bring various emotions and anxiety-induced thoughts and feelings of how autistic men and women do struggle to manage and compartmentalise, the routines and activities that they rely on to cope with their day-to-day living as autistic people. Where the two genders differ, for autistic men, friendships and that can be seen as more activity and special interests based, as it's influenced and that by their similarity and minds are being alike, and they are less emotionally expressive in their nature. They often prefer to be in smaller groups that is based around physical, online and collecting activities like sports, computers, model trains, for example, in contrast to being in large groups of people and going into very, very busy situations where their sensory inputs and that would go into overdrive, like going into nightclubs or going to concerts and that where there's like 100,000 people there. For autistic women, same again, they do want to have friendships, but it often comes with certain caveats in terms of it might put other people off if they come across overly attached or clingy. They imitate other people around them or struggle to identify those healthy boundaries and that's important and for friendships to grow. And they might suffer exhaustion and out of how to deal with certain boundaries or when they face like constant rejection. On top of that, and that they can also be vulnerable and that to where people can take advantage of them or be abused, which can be a very terrifying thing, and that for an autistic woman or even women in general, and that because sometimes they have to deal with real bad people when they're out in public and that who would want to take advantage of them, and they need to learn how to keep themselves safe when they're out in public or they're in social situations, and how to keep themselves safe. These experiences are usually often that autistic women and that feel more deeply than their neurotypical peers, and they want to put the effort into these friendships, but like autistic men, they struggle with understanding the awareness and understanding of the social clues that's needed and that to be able to maintain such relationships. I've struggled to form and maintain friendships with others, and this is mainly, down to me not fully understanding those social clues, and that where it's not always written, it's like those unspoken expectations, and that everyone seems to grasp, but for autistic people, and it's like we just don't know it. It's like it's something that we have to learn. And for me, I've always been a bit of a Billy No Mates kind of person, despite wanting to build friendships and relationships. And I think also, dealing with that fear of rejection, that I have faced in the past, where I might have had like one or two friendships and that have just broken down or we've drifted apart as time goes on, and I've struggled sometimes to process that breaking down process, but the one thing I've had to learn is that, life goes on and you have to evolve with it, and you have to be open to developing friendships with new people. You can't always rely on the same person time and time again and that to be there with you. I've had to learn from that mistake myself. And I know autistic people, we like seeing the same people, but sometimes that's not always the case, and sometimes life isn't as fair as that. And that's just a simple truth that we have to learn, grasp, and build ourselves up as individuals, and to accept and embrace that truth. Characteristic number 4, special interests. For many years, autistic advocates like myself, we have massively defended the fact that special interests are an important and fulfilling aspect of an autistic person's life, and also how it aids their learning and development. Special interests can change and evolve as we get older as individuals and the more life experience we build. Even though society often see them as obsessive, repetitive, or intense, us autistics do not see it that way, and that we see special interests as a way of expressing our creativity, focusing our minds on things and that in times of when we are faced with heightened anxiety, and help us navigate through a neurotypical world and that's so chaotic, whilst bringing us sources of joy, knowledge, and developing new skills, which can help us towards wanting to build certain careers, start a business, or develop even new hobbies and interests as you go on. The differentiation between autistic men and women isn't necessarily about the subjects or the topics entirely. It's often the intensity of how both genders experience and feel those special interests and that individually. It is often found that autistic men's interests may align with those stereotypical autistic topics like trains, technology, numbers, science, and various other topics that you could write a list of, whilst autistic women's interests may appear more socially typical, like books, animals, learning about their favourite celebrities, psychology, and even other things. Some of my special interests are like when I was a teenager, I used to watch Top Gear with Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May, and throughout the years when I was a teenager, and even as they progressed onto like the Grand Tour and various other programmes that they have done up to the present day. Also been a huge fan of the 007 franchise, and how my love of cars and how it has developed and that from that. So, the journey of special interests can be as unique as the individual who possesses them. Characteristic number 5, emotional regulation and sensory processing. When it comes to regulating one's emotions and processing their sensory inputs, autistic people do find this very challenging in terms of their day-to-day living, and often requires many steps of being able to calm down and develop the skills to be aware of their thoughts and emotions and be able to process them accordingly. An example of this, like I said earlier, being in a concert with 100,000 people, there's flashing lights, sounds going off all over the place, and you're so cocooned in that crowd where you can't breathe, and you can't see the exits, and that to be able to get out of that situation. And that's where your heightened anxieties, and that it just peaks to that point where sometimes you're not aware of your own surroundings, and then that puts you in a vulnerable position if you don't know how to deal with those situations accordingly. For autistic men, they express their emotions more outwardly in forms of frustration, meltdowns, shouting, anger, meltdowns, to the point where people can visually see their distress. And this is mainly down to the fact that boys and men aren't taught how to process their emotions effectively and be able to express them to others. And that is often down to the fear of being judged or being laughed at, or they might have had an experience as a child where they've maybe lived in an abusive household where it makes them feel closed off to the world, and it's like they have to keep themselves locked in, and that because that's their way of being able to stay in control. For autistic women, they keep their emotions more internally, and it often manifests itself in feelings of anxiety, depression, overthinking patterns, crying in private, exhaustion, and this constant need for perfection. Now, this is mainly down to, girls and women are more emotional beings, and that their emotions can often be influenced by social factors and the difficulty to process those feelings. Again, it's that fear of judgment, and they don't want to be perceived as weak or be judged by this, unconscious bias that neurotypical people have on autistic people. So they try and keep their thoughts to themselves, or only express them and that to people that they can trust. It's not that girls don't know how to process their emotions, it's more that they choose to, as and when only, to express those feelings. Going back to the example of where being in busy places and dealing with loads of crowds of people, that would be one of my sensory overloading nightmares, and it would be something where I'd lose my mind and not be aware of my surroundings. But as part of my personal development, over time, I've managed to, handle those busy situations more better and be aware of my surroundings to try and keep myself safe. Even though I've still got that limitation of how much I can manage before the distress signs, show themselves in a way that tells me and others that when enough is enough, and I've got to pull myself out of that situation. Now, I know that is something that I've had to learn, the hard way, and it wasn't easy. But the one reality that you all need to learn is that you can't avoid certain situations just because they're busy, or you don't know how you're going to manage yourself in that situation. You're allowing your anxiety, your fears to control your life. You're not always going to have the support systems in place to do things for you. There's many things that you have to face and confront, and be able to grow in confidence to be able to deal with them effectively. And that's one of the key goals of becoming more independent, which I think every autistic person wants to achieve. But by doing that, you've got to let go or be able to diminish the level of fear and anxiety you allow, and for it to control your life. Characteristic number 6, mental health and identity. The relationship that mental health and identity has with people on the autism spectrum is deeply rooted and complex, as it can affect people on the autistic spectrum and in various ways, where no two people have the exact same experiences, even though there will be similarities between the two. It has been noted by research many times that autistic people are more likely to suffer with mental health and anxiety more than neurotypical people will over the course of their life. As I've said many times, mental health or anxiety is one of the major cornerstones of the autistic spectrum. It's something you can't avoid or just get rid of. It's something that you do have to manage. And once you develop the skills and have that virtual toolbox that I've mentioned many times in other videos in place, and where you've got strategies and tools of how you can cope with those heightened anxious situations, and the more you practice it, the more stronger person you become in terms of confidence and becoming more independent. And so you're not being reliant on other people to help you. Because the one thing is to self-teach yourself in becoming that the best version of yourself. For autistic men, their mental health journeys can spiral in various forms like frustration, anger, social rejection, disturbing behaviours, and self-harm, and in severe cases, sometimes having the thoughts of suicide. And that is something that no person should have to face. And if you are in that situation, then please, I urge you to get in touch with the right health support people, and like the Samaritans, and that's if you really are struggling, because just killing yourself is not the right answer. Don't take the easy way out. Lives are devastated every year by a family member or someone that they're close to has taken their own life by suicide, and it devastates many people. Especially if it's something in that where intervention and that can take place to help that person, and that from that visual abyss and that they have in their minds, and so they can help them, rejuvenate their minds and soul, and that towards recovery and becoming a more stronger person as a result of it. For autistic women, and they do have the same kind of behaviours like anxiety and depression, maybe self-harm and chronic stress, but often eating disorders and various other things of a similar nature can often occur. By masking their autistic traits for both genders can often be one of the influencing factors of that contributes to them having these many feelings and states of minds, although where they feel like they're in a bit of a rut and they feel like they can't get out of it. And these experiences can often vary from one autistic person to another. Coming to terms with one's autism identity is a major hurdle that many autistic men and women will have to face as they try and understand why they're different from other children or other adults, and as they try and build towards having that self-acceptance and that for their autism. For autistic men, they will know that they're different to others and they'll often embrace it, and they'll reject this social expectation and focus on their special interests. And where autistic women will often spend years asking why do they not fit in naturally and why making friends is difficult for them, and feel exhausted after being in social situations. And this usually is down to autistic women not being misdiagnosed or receiving a diagnosis later on in life. And as I've said before, it can often bring a mixed emotions of like relief and grief to the individuals. As an autistic person, I've had a long relationship with mental health, where I've suffered with anxiety attacks and physical distress, caused by intrusive thoughts and certain phobias, to the point where I didn't want to leave the house. To overcome my mental health journey, which was a long one, I used a variety of different strategies like mindfulness and learning about cognitive behavioural therapy, shortened as CBT, to help me establish, that virtual toolbox, as I mentioned, of different methods and ideas and strategies that can help me massively overcome that overall anxious state that I was in, and to try and build towards a stage in my life where that I wanted to be in, and done so with sheer resilience and determination. Some of these methods, and that I still use even to this day, to navigate, sometimes those stressful and anxious situations and that can often occur. Despite the differences in terms of how autism presents itself uniquely in men and women, both genders and that do share a lot of core characteristics that anyone who is experienced enough to be around autistic people or who are autistic themselves and that will often notice. And these can range from sensory sensitivities, the constant need for routine and certainty, that deep focus and passion and that for their interests and various hobbies, challenges with handling social communication, tendency to get overwhelmed or suffer with severe burnout, and that when they've been overloaded with various sensory inputs or situations and all of it, where it's just boiled up their anxiety and this unnerviness of uncertainty just gets too much for them. They can often demonstrate, literal thinking or lateral thinking, where they can think outside the box and look at, the bigger picture as well as looking at those little details of things. Challenges with like executive functioning, so like dealing with, like time management or deadlines and various other things and that can often occur in the workplace. They do have a very strong sense of justice, of when, what is right and what is wrong. And they can often, stand firm in their beliefs and, values and principles, that goes against, all the societal expectations and norms and all of that people feel like they're accustomed to, or they just follow, even though when it might be wrong. Autistic people, they'll stand firm what they truly believe in. And most importantly, they'll do so, and that when it comes to the interests and looking out for other autistic people too. They'll have difficulty with managing unexpected changes. So when something has been put on them at the last minute, and that they just go into in a right bobble and think, God, what do I do now? Because they haven't been given plenty of notice of how to deal with that situation or when that change has occurred. They usually demonstrate more honest communication styles. What you see is what you get. Just say it how it is. In one way, that is a good attribute, and that because I do prefer people that just say it how it is. But then on the same side to that, they might often struggle to, adapt their communication style to situations and that when it's more suitable. So let's say if you're dealing with someone who's a relative has passed away, you've got to be a bit more tactful and be able to, show a bit of empathy for that other person and that in that hard time. Then again, that is something and other autistic people might struggle with recognising and be able to adapt their communication accordingly. Some of the key strengths and abilities that autistic people will have, like hyperfocus, the ability to concentrate deeply on a task and topic for a long time, and often shows high productivity and expert knowledge. The attention to detail, strong talent for noticing small errors, facts and visual changes that other people often miss. Pattern recognition, natural skill for spotting trends, system rules and hidden connections in data, maths and music. Exceptional memory, great long-term memory for recalling specific facts, rules and details of areas of interest. Honesty and directness, clear, straightforward communication style with strong sense of fairness and personal integrity. Loyalty and dedication, deep commitment and reliability in friendships, family bonds and work duties. So now we understand what the differentiations between autistic men and women are and what shared characteristics and that they both exhibit. How can we come together and to support one another for greater unity and within the autism community? Now, I've thought of a few ideas and that could help us strengthen that unity even further. Number 1, recognise the different autistic experiences and listen with kindness and compassion. One of the biggest sources of division within the community is where we compare ourselves to people that are neurotypical, and we struggle to have this willingness and to listen. Most autistic men and women wish that people could recognise their struggles and not assume that they are just they are weird or obtuse or just being, totally different. The issue with this is that you'll practically are just talking to like a brick wall. It goes in one ear and out the other ear. And that's how stubborn our society has become. And we need to learn how to stand up for ourselves and not allow society to dictate on how we should live our autistic lives. Remember, we are the makers of our own happiness and success. The autism community can become stronger and supportive if we start replacing the comparisons for certain standards with curiosity for others and learning from their perspectives. One of the greatest acts of acceptance is listening without assuming. As an autistic man, there will be many aspects of being an autistic woman that I cannot fully understand or comprehend. Likewise, autistic women cannot fully understand every aspect that is associated with growing up as an autistic man. That doesn't mean that either perspective is incomplete or one is better than the other. It means that both are valid and they're valuable to listen and to support each other. All of this is something that I've had to learn the long way round, to be more open-minded to other people's perspectives and lose this ego that I thought I knew everything about autism when I didn't. And it was only when I started listening to other people's experiences that I started to appreciate it more and show respect when it was truly needed. It was only when I started to show affection and acceptance towards my autism and not hate or question myself for it. That's when my mind and soul became free and showed willing to learn and understand greater. It is the art of growing up and maturing to think about others rather than focusing solely on ourselves. Number 2, advocate for everyone on the autism spectrum and give encouragement they need to grow and prosper. Advocating for everyone on the autism spectrum is a mission that everyone has a part to play in. If we ever want to achieve greater unity and collaboration within the autism community. There's one thing to remember: autism is not defined by gender. It's shaped by individual experiences and shared perspectives on a wide range of concerns that autistic people will have at any stage of their lives. It is something that has to be done continuously, not just a one-time thing. It becomes part of your existence as an autistic person, as you want to give other autistic people the benefit of your own experiences and intuition and wisdom. Men and women may walk slightly different paths and have biological differences that the opposite sex might not fully understand, despite their best intentions, but they do often face similar challenges, like wanting to be understood, accepted, and belong somewhere that feels like home. That's where the real strength and compassion lies. Together, they provide a fuller picture of what autism is like as a human living experience and a purposeful way of life. When I see other autistic people struggling and maybe don't see or realise their full potential, it makes me understand how lucky I am to have been able to find and use my voice for not only for standing up for myself and my goals and dreams, but also for others when they maybe don't know how to. I've always been a person of huge determination and not wanting society to decide what's best for me. Ever since I was a child, but I just did not know how I was going to achieve it. Always remember, it's never too late to turn your life round for the better. You just got to believe in yourself and have the work ethic, determination, the know-how, and how to get there. And you will figure that out for yourself as you progress on those journeys of success that is defined by you, not by society. Number 3, focus on becoming the best versions of yourself that oozes confidence and independence that makes you unrecognisable. To become the best version of yourself, you need to invest in your own journey of personal development, which is paramount to your success and building towards the person you want to become. A more confident, independent, positive thinking, resilient and determined version of you. You can use a variety of different tools like journaling and mindfulness to help you guide you into developing a positive mindset and changing those negative affirmations that you might hold about yourself into routines of positivity and self-compassion. Also, focus on pursuing the goals and dreams that bring you joy and fulfillment to your life, and seize the opportunities to grow and develop as an autistic person. These can be following your special interests that can guide you on a path to a certain career, or maybe developing your own business. Just by following your purpose and what you want out of life, you become unrecognisable to others. Those who put you down growing up as a child and make you feel insecure for just being your true self. This way is the best revenge you can get for proving to those who discredit you wrong at some point in the past. For me, working on building and developing the Aspergian Journal is something that I'm passionate about, and hopefully it'll lead to greater things in the future. Initially, I wanted a high-flying career as a chartered accountant, but after a series of unseen circumstances and obviously getting a bit older and more mature for my age, I just lost the buzz for it, and it was in that period of time in my life where the creation or the idea of the Aspergian Journal, was formed alongside, fulfilling one of my life's missions. And that mission is be a leading and inspiring voice for the autism community and be a living example of what autistic people can do when they put their minds, hearts and souls into something and they see it flourish over time. Now, I back myself and on my mission and towards that greatness and that of putting autism on the map, and that so it can shine in its true self. Are you backing yourself on whatever your mission or goals and dreams are? That is a question that only you can answer. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you would like to see more autism content, please consider subscribing to the Aspergian Journal on YouTube and Substack so you can be kept in the loop for when new content is released. As always, thank you.